Welcome to the Westport Library. Today's program will begin momentarily. Supported by Verso Studios, created locally and shared with the world.
Thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate painter Steve Moen and what I believe is his first solo exhibit in Connecticut, Circling Back. I'm Carol Erger-Fass, exhibit curator at the library. The title Circling Back couldn't be more appropriate because it describes both Steve's journey to get here as well as his creative process. As a kid growing up in Westport, Steve spent his childhood around the tidal marshes and jetties at the shoreline, inspiring many of the landscapes included in the show. He lives in Maryland now and travels back often to see his family and revisits those places he remembers. And it's always gratifying to reconnect with an artist who got their start right here in town. In fact, I think I went to high school with that guy a couple of times while we were hanging. Circling Back also refers to how Steve creates his paintings. Working plein air, he begins with small studies done on location in watercolor or oil, or sketched digitally on his phone. These sparks of creativity evolve into more complete paintings back in his studio, where he can more fully explore the light and color of a particular moment he captured in nature. Poetry is often part of the process, with short haikus adding another layer to the mix. Finally, Steve hand makes the wood frames that are unique to each painting, completing the journey. I want to thank everybody who helps to make the library's art programming happen, our fabulous art committee who pitches in with everything from planning the calendar to hanging the art to pouring the wine. Catherine Ross, Ann Levine, and Marianne Hedricks are here tonight. Special thanks to committee member and interviewer for the evening, Miggs Burroughs. Also our audio engineer, Travis Bell, and our video producer, Fred Lavins, who's recording tonight's talk, and it will be available on our website in a few days. And by the way, it doesn't seem to be working with me right now, but we're gonna try something new tonight. We're doing a closed captioning this evening, and hopefully this is something we'll be able to continue with in the future.
So I have to trigger this to make the closed captioning work. And we'll see how it'll be below the images, and we'll see how the translation works. If you start laughing uncontrollably while we're talking about something serious, then we'll know it's not working. But so what we're gonna do is, so the slides will change automatically every 15 seconds or so. And we're just going to carry on the conversation. Is it working? Can you see it? Okay. So whatever we're talking about will relate or not relate directly to the imagery, but it all relates because it's all Steve's work. So I guess what I wanted to start out with was something you said when you come to visit the gallery while we're installing the show. And I asked you about, I don't know, what's your chosen style, and you said that representational, more traditional landscape painting didn't appeal to you, and I didn't really pursue it then because I wanted to wait for now, but what was that did it ever appeal to you, or was that something you transitioned to this style?
Well, for a long time, I did try to paint realistically, and as a matter of fact, when I was in Alexandria, Virginia, I was studying at the torpedo factory, a very traditional way of painting. And, Miggs Burroughs has a painting at the Silvermine Gallery that's Lady Diana, and it transitions into Marilyn Monroe. But one of the guys, two of the people I studied with in in Alexandria at the torpedo factory they worked with a guy named Nelson Shanks in Pennsylvania, and he actually did a portrait of Princess Di and Bill Clinton. So these artists who worked in his studio, they were magnificent, realistic painters, and they painted in a full spectrum palette. You know, multiple yellows, blues, greens, purples, and they could reproduce things just incredibly. I found that the closer I got to a real good representation, the less I liked it. And I couldn't do it as well as some of the other people, but I loved what was happening with the color. So then I started deviating from that. I had to find my own way.
So in the gallery on display is a little vignette, I guess you'd call it. There's two little sketches leading up to the final piece. Mm-hmm. One is, like you said, you did on the iPhone.
Right.
And then there's another one on tin flashing.
Right.
So it's sort of a two question. What is tin flashing? Why did you pick that to paint on? And then the other thing is, what happens between the iPhone sketch and the final piece? What changes happen?
That's a good question. What I found when making any kind of a change, I like moving to a destination when I paint. I find that if I can walk or run or travel long distance, just the process of getting someplace is soothing and interesting. So then I try to capture what's there. But when you're going there, the light's changing. You know, everything's changing dramatically. So you can't keep up with anything. You're just kind of taking notes. So I would use the tin flashing because I could travel further, faster with the tin flashing. And tin flashing is something you use on the roof of houses. And I was using long strips of tin flashing that I would cut. It's 6 inches wide. I'd cut it to 6 inches. I'd sand it down, put gesso on it, and then I'd travel someplace and I'd paint. But the person where I read, a famous artist who did that is Lois Dodd. And she had a show in Stanford not too long, about a couple years ago, and I got to see some of her tin flashing studies, which I thought I was replicating. She painted on real small, tiny tin flashing that was much smaller than what I was doing, and my stuff is very small, but she loves sketching like that. But she's the one I got the idea from, and I thought it was really fun. So then going from one painting to the other, the challenge is, you have the color, you have the abstractions. Can you reproduce it exactly? I never could. My bigger painting would be slightly different dimensions, and as I moved into that, I found that painting had to take a path of its own. And so each painting would take its own path, and you'd have to bring it to its conclusion.
So, I mean, is there anything specific you actually learned from the sketch? Like, that doesn't work, so I'm going to change direction, or it needs more red or more blue, or less of this and more of that? I mean, what is it?
Yeah, that's...
Is it all those?
Sometimes it gets confusing because you ask those questions, but then you can't find the answers. And then all of a sudden, I do something when I paint where if things aren't going that well, I break it. You know, I put paint where it shouldn't be, I mix a paint. I might end a painting session where I take a color on the palette and I said, I'm just going to put it somewhere where I can have a better starting point tomorrow. So at that point, the small painting doesn't help the big point painting. I'm just trying to survive out there. It's like playing tennis and someone hits a real tough shot for you, and you just do whatever you can to get it back over the net so you can continue with the point. That's kind of how it works sometimes.
So I grew up in Westport, so I'm curious what your early memories are. This is circling back. So what was the affection? Was it all nature? Was it Westport's natural beauty or features that appealed to you?
The interesting thoughts I had at this point where I was helping my parents through their senior years, and the thoughts I was going through my head was what memories are the strongest in your head and what are the weakest? Because now that I'm getting older, I found some of my most vivid memories are when I'm 12 or 8. And some of the memories along the shore, those memories are like when I was 6. And so I was going back to those memories. And that's what's kind of fun about visiting those sites, because how many times can you go back to where you were 6 years old and have that memory? And then a lot of the stuff in the paintings, it has elements in the painting that have different rhythms to it, like tides or ducks flying, or maybe a cloud floating over a pond or something. So things have different rhythms, and just like a human life.
So do the memories sometimes take over reality? I mean, if you're there as an adult and then you do you have flashbacks of like what it smelled like, looked like when you were 6 or 8 and then, is that, maybe that's what Impressionism is, or is that what do you try to embed your work with the memories as well as the reality?
I think, well, in some cases, there are certain marsh pools that I would see that they were very vibrant today, but they were much more vibrant when I was 6. And part of it might be through how it might be due to just pollution and just change along the shore. But I was going back to very vivid memories of seeing lots of different things in those marsh pools. And just each pool had a wonder to them. And the other thing I kind of relating to was each marsh pool, you have the tides coming in, coming out, but it seemed like a community of life in those marsh pools. And I found that kind of interesting. It's like, this life is just surviving there, and it's been, 60 years plus. And how has it changed? How is it different? And it's just fun to ponder that. And where's it going from here? That's the other question.
And I think the last several images have been of marsh pools, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the last several have been. So these are just studies. I asked you, but I don't want to put you on the spot if you forgot.
Right.
Haiku poetry,
Right.
you said, is a big part of the process, or I don't know which comes first. You do a piece and you write haiku, particularly, right? Mm-hmm. Do you have one? Well, we can do a few sprinkled throughout. Do you have a haiku?
Well, it's let's see. There's one today where I kind of giggled out. We went to the Y, and my wife and son and I, we worked out at the Y. And there was one tin flashing study I did years ago when my dad was still swimming. And I was at the shore of Camp Mahakano looking down to where I used to swim and fly off a rope swing. And when I was a kid, I'd swim across the Lee's Pond, And my dad has always been not very interested in the arts. My mother was interested in the arts. My dad, it goes right over his head, so I think sometimes. But my dad has got a great spirit for following adventure and just one adventure after another. And I always think he's listening to the siren songs. So the haiku goes, as my father swam to the song of sirens, I painted by the shore. But the funny thing is, you envision this person, at a lake, the father swimming at the shore, but my dad was in the pool swimming laps. and I was just at the shore painting, So it was a kind of a funny haiku, but it describes both of us pretty well.
I have to ask, this is more personal, but a personal memory for me, but I went to Mahakano, and they don't do it anymore, I guess, for liability reasons, but there was an inflatable thing, they called it Moby Dick. This inflatable, did you remember? You'd jump up and down this giant inflatable boat that was used, I think, in World War II as a landing craft or something, and you'd, like a trampoline, you'd jump and then fly yourself into Lee's.
Right.
Did you remember that? Did you do that?
I never went to Camp Mahakano, but I saw that.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway.
There was a rope swing off the bank further down near the dam, and you'd climb way up the hill, and you just fly off it, and people would do flips off that, and it was kind of crazy. I don't think parents would allow their kids to do that anymore. And we used to ride our bikes to those places at 12 years old, and without helmets. And I've been driving the roads of Westport, going, who would let their kids drive these roads without helmets around here?
Excuse me, for some reason it stopped. Well, it was the end of the cycle, but it's supposed to keep repeating, so let me get it going again. Okay. So what does come first? The poetry inspires a mood, a painting, an emotion, and then you paint it, or you're reacting to your own work or a natural scene? The story, it was years ago, I'd say about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I was always interested in writing, and writing some comical stuff, and poetry I like the sounds of word relationships. And one year I went to the Phillips Gallery. They had a Georgia O'Keeffe show, but it wasn't to look at her paintings. The little session that I signed up for was a writing session. And there they really pushed the heartfelt, interpretation of Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings. And doing that, I thought, wow, this is such a cooler way to get yourself into a painting. And once I started doing that, I saw how it could change the direction of my painting. My paintings don't start with a haiku. I walk out to a point, I make my first marks, and then when I have to walk all the way back, I'm thinking about it, and then it goes back into my studio and I'm still thinking about it, and then I'm thinking about a haiku, and then I'm just thinking about a haiku that can maybe push it one way or the other, but usually the whole thing's formulating while you're moving along. And in the end, it's nice to have a nice match. And that was the painting of Camp. That's a painting of Lee's Pond looking down from the Y. And that branch hanging over from the left is still there. It's bigger now. So it almost covers the whole view of Lee's Pond. And so much of that's such a great shot.
Now the sticks in that shot, my daughter's there, she's in her late 30s, and she colored a lot of those sticks, and so did my son. And that's a circling back story. We walk to the creeks, you find a sycamore tree with long branches, the bark is really easy to peel off. You gesso the sticks, and then you take acrylic paint and you paint them. And so you're playing with the juxtaposition of paint, which is what I find so interesting. So the sticks on that vase were, they're still in my living room.
There's some shots of, are you a beekeeper as well?
My daughter got me into beekeeping, and it's a never-ending battle with bees. You can't get them through the season, but I've been doing it for like 12 years, and I gave up on buying. You buy the whole package of bees, and then you set them up, and you can get a nice harvest of honey. But what I do now is I set up a box 7 feet high, and with some frames in there, and then I put some queen pheromone in it, and this is the month of May and June, and I try to attract a bee swarm into the box, which I then move down into supers and I just play with the bees just to follow nature and see what they do, because not only are bees challenged by varroa mites and hive beetles, but they're attacked by other beehives. So you have bees robbing other bees' hives all the time, and it's just something I like to study now. So this year I didn't get a bee swarm. It's the first year in 5 years I haven't gotten a bee swarm, but I love studying the bees,
I mean, this is apropos of nothing except yesterday, for the first time since I was 12 years old, I was stung by a bee in my own house.
What, was it a bee or was it a horn?
Yellow jacket.
Yellow jacket. See, those guys are mean. Those guys.
It was on my little finger. I felt like somebody hit me with a hammer. It was painful. Anyway.
Right.
So there was a picture that went by already, but it's a car rolling over what looks like a piece of plywood.
Right.
What is that about? What's
Okay, there's a guy named, my wife and I were out in Palm Springs, and we did a long hike, and when we came down to the museum, it was an open session, and they have some wonderful paintings in that. And there's a guy named Stanley Whitney who did this. He's this real great colorist, and he does these blocks of colors. And this painting was done on a press using watercolor. And I was just amazed because I got my start here in Westport studying with Antum and Roth and Bob Baxter and Charlie Reed. And Bob Baxter was here tonight. And so I was a watercolor painter first. And so I saw Stanley Whitney's print with watercolor. I said, I got to figure out a way to do that. So I built my own press that I would, it's a piece of wood, and then I dampen I take my press plate becomes a piece of plywood that I put varnish over, and then I paint on that, and then I put it on top of wet paper, and then I drive my Subaru over, and that becomes my first mark. That's the painting right there. So you can see the grain of the paper from the wood, and then from there I try to finish the painting. But that's a painting of Duck, North Carolina, that I was noticing these trees coming in from the inlet shore, and I just said, that's kind of like breaking the painting too. You're breaking it from the start because you're just smashing it with a piece of plywood as you're beginning, and then you're trying to recover. It's like trying to recover from a crazy tennis point, or now I'm playing more pickleball than tennis. So you're just reacting to things.
So if I went to Jerry's Autorama, would they sell me the plywood and a Subaru?
Yeah,
like you wanted to make?
Right.
So there's some terms I had to write them down because I probably wouldn't remember that you use. Well, the word emotion comes up a lot. Emotional landscapes, emotional layers, spectrum, magnetic spectrum. What does that mean first?
Yeah.
What do those refer to?
Once I had some Jehovah's Witness come to my door, and I think I was painting that day, and they said, the first question was, do you ever ponder the mysteries of life? And of course I do. And then the next question was, do you know why the sky is blue? And when they asked, do you know why the sky is blue, I started talking about the magnetic spectrum and how the red part of that spectrum, the red waves are really long, and so when the sun's setting, those waves are going to hit your eye, but those blue and purple waves are really small, and they're bouncing all over the place through the atmosphere, and if you wake up early in the morning, you're going to see very blue shadows because that's the light that's bouncing all over the place, and that's why the water's blue, and that's why the sky is blue, and if you ever want to see one of my favorite I use the word religious monuments in Washington, D.C. Go to the East Wing of the National Gallery of Art, where all my favorite painters are. And they came back and visited me the next 2 weekends after talking about that. But that's what I find magical. You're seeing the visual part of the magnetic spectrum, and then your eye is seeing it, but your eye is seeing it through a red, green, blue, which is how a TV set works. And when it sees a color, the colors next to it are firing the opposite, and that's what simultaneous color contrast is all about. And that's a magical experience of color. So you have a guy like Joseph Albers who just painted those squares, and he could paint one square against another one, and you're seeing multiple colors because of how your eye is responding to the color, and it's fascinating. Or you go to or you see a Mark Rothko painting, which might be two big squares, and how your eye responds to that is it's just incredible because you start seeing all these other colors once you start looking. It took me 20 years to figure out how to see a Mark Rothko painting. But that stuff's magical. And yeah, go ahead.
That's what you call the physiology of
Yeah,
color
that's
perception?
the physiology of colors, how you're experiencing that color. And that's what I find so exciting about painting. It's working with those colors. Now, when I'm actually painting and I have a problem, I live like a half a mile from a Home Depot, and I'm always getting their paint samples because I'll lay my painting flat on the ground and I'll cut out a piece of a paint sample just to drop it on the painting, and it literally affects all the other colors on the canvas. So that's how I often try to resolve problems.
But to embed, I guess, invest emotion into a piece, so you're very deliberate about the use of certain colors will trigger a response. I mean, is that a tool?
That's a tool, and like certain colors will trigger a response. Like if you have black against yellow, you have a different feeling than if you're doing analogous colors, like maybe pink to violet to magenta. That can be very soothing, and it might be because it reminds you of a setting sun at night. But you know, it's how you react to the colors there, and I've totally changed up paintings, not so much with it. A lot of times I'm working, it's moving this direction, and then I'm reacting emotionally to what's happening. And then I try to get it back, but it might go somewhere else. But then, you know, it's a battle between you and the painting a lot of times. It can be, for me, it can take, I've literally have paintings sitting downstairs that I bring up and I'll change them 2 years later. You know, it's kind of crazy. So it's a horrible way to make a living if you're ever thinking of doing it that way.
Have you ever, in your past, I mean, this is a very specific grouping of paintings, but portraits, were you ever interested in portraiture? Or?
Oh, I was very interested in portraiture, and I loved doing it. And one of the portraits I did of myself, I would go on sales calls, and I was a magazine printing salesman, so I would call on magazine publishers, and I'd make some calls. I'd bring my watercolors with me, and one of the portraits that I used as my Facebook, you know, identifier was a portrait I did in a hotel room in Virginia Beach, and it's from when I was in my 30s, but it still kind of looks like me, you know. But it has some very abstract elements to it, and I still like it. But I love doing portraiture. But what I like more is I like walking into the wilderness somewhere. That's a part of the experience that I really like. So if I'm looking at a person's face, I kind of get bored. I'd rather be walking somewhere in nature, you know. So it's the journey there is part of the fun for me, and that's why.
Maybe you could read another very long haiku while I'm trying to figure out, get this going again. Do you have another haiku?
Oh, God.
Do you memorize them, or you don't have to? How many do you think? Well,
actually, I at this point, they're escaping me. There's one where it's like something, you find yourself when you lose yourself around the bend behind a rock. And that's one of the paintings up here. And the fun thing about that painting is that's on the Virginia side of Great Falls. It's right below Great Falls. And to get to that place, and it's this painting right here. Yeah, that painting right there. The fun thing about that painting is to get to that place, there's a little cut in the fence that you have to walk down this treacherous, steep, rocky slope to get down to the bottom. But when you get down to the bottom, the river's roaring by just after it goes by Great Falls. And then those rocks that I painted are so smooth from thousands of years of just being worn down, and they have circles in them. But the cool thing about that place is then you can start working your way up those rocks, and at the very top of that, there's a little step over a very steep incline down into the river that you can make to get to the top of the next ledge. So it's a real nice way of finding yourself as you move around the rocks, around the bend. And, you know, that's the journey of that painting. It's a fun place.
Did you ever, as a kid, your father's here, but it's probably too late for him to punish you. Did you ever get into any mischief as a little kid exploring Westport in the marshes? We live near a river, and my parents said we were forbidden to go near the river.
Right.
And, you know, we had to walk through the woods a little bit. And then we'd come back, and they'd say, we told you not to go near the river. And we said, no, we weren't near the river. And then he'd look at our shoes covered with mud. Obviously, we were near the river.
I never had that problem with my dad. My dad never really kept track of us like that.
Oh.
And I was always at the river fishing or doing whatever. But, you know, I know some of the guys used to jump off the railroad bridge. And I never did that, because I was always worried about what was under that railroad bridge.
Well, supposedly the Black Duck will give you, I don't know, free beers for life if you jump off the railroad bridge and survive. I don't know if that's true, so don't quote me on that. But I have heard that story.
Now, Devil's Den was a fun place to jump off those rocks, but there was a super high elevation where you had to leap to clear the rocks to get down to the water, and I never did that one.
Yeah, thankfully. Thankfully, or you probably wouldn't be here.
That's the portrait I did.
Oh, there you go.
That's the portrait I did when I was a salesman. And I was in a Hotel 6 or something. It was right by the beach, and I always liked that place because I kind of knew the person there. But I'm in the hotel room painting that painting, and it's just a hotel room. And the paint kept dripping off one side of the page. I thought, oh, that kind of looks kind of cool. So the abstraction just happened from dripping paint coming over.
So I don't know, you know, people go to art school, and you took lessons from Bob Baxter and Annie Toulmin-Roth. And do you teach as well? Have you
No, I never taught.
No.
I never taught. I was always kind of exploring different ways of doing it. So I learned from Bob Baxter and Toulmin-Roth, and one of the favorite things I learned from and Charlie Reed was in his book. He talked about, you know, you don't have to paint in values, dark to light. You can paint cool to warm or warm to cool. And the other thing that Bob would always do is he would maybe put some red in the nose, and then he'd have a nice blue under the neck. But from the printing industry prints with just basically 3 colors plus black. It's cyan, magenta, and yellow. And then from there you have the TV set, which is red, green, blue. So that became my color wheel, you know, those 6 colors. But Charlie Reed would put that cerulean blue under the neck and then a red at the nose, and that's the complement of that color wheel that I always lived by. It always seemed to work, and it worked because of how your eye responded to those colors with the simultaneous color contrast, which is what Rothko does. It's what, you know, Joseph Albers does. But it's that visual experience that I find so exciting.
And one other phrase that I forgot to ask you about, maybe it's, what was it? Oh, additive.
That's a cell phone painting.
Oh, yeah, so what
that,
program do you use?
What?
What is it, what do you program, app do you use?
The app I use is one that just appeared on my phone. It was called Freeform. And I think business people use it to communicate with more, you know, serious stuff. But part of that, I saw how you can use color on that. And you're using a red, green, blue system where you're moving dials, or you can set it up for how you want to use it. And then you have different ways of drawing different types of images on your phone. So that picture of the cactus and the distant mountain, my wife and I were hiking Indian Springs, I think it was, and outside Palm Springs. And we were the only ones that were able to get across the creek because it was roaring so fast. And I went across without my backpack first to see if I could do it, and then I carried the backpacks over. And then when we went to this glorious place where I saw this blooming cactus against a distant snow-capped peak. And in that painting, I got a feel, I really stored, I looked at that cactus a long time, I looked at that peak, I took a picture, and then later I drew that image from the intense light that I saw there, but that was all on the freeform app. And that became my go-to drawing tool when I travel long distances, and I love drawing with that when I travel, you know, wherever, because you just need your phone to draw things.
And use your finger or a stylus?
Use your
You just
finger.
use your finger?
Use your finger, and then you're either moving a thin line, you can create a shape and put color into it. And if you don't like what you did, here's the key thing. If I'm looking for the relationship, how my eye responds, and if I don't like it, there's a back arrow, and it just wipes out your last move. And then you could put a new one in. And so you can really explore color, and you can't do that with oil paint or watercolor. Watercolor, you lay down a color and you're in trouble if you don't like it. And oil paint, you often have to wait for it to dry before you can do something else too. But that phone, you can move back and forth and kind of get a real nice relationship. It's kind of fun.
But what changed when you put it on a surface like canvas, or I mean, you're going from a glass screen to a real...
Well, then I print it out. So I get it on the phone, then I print it out, and then I have and there's a way of taking a screenshot. You know, you can do a screenshot of what you got, and then I move it into my photos, and then I crop it, and then I have my image that I print out, and then I say, okay, I got this, now what can I do with that? And so then you're moving along, and like I said before, I can never reproduce one thing to another, and I don't even find it fun. I find it tedious. So I'd rather go from this to that and say, okay, I got this, I got the memory, and now I'm going to this, and I'm going to see where that goes.
And I think one other question before we take questions. I'm always curious about artists' scale of work, like what the choice. I mean, you have work that's kind of small and intimate, and then what's the decision-making process of this needs to be 4 feet wide, and this one needs to be, 10 inches wide?
Well, my sister has a friend, and my sister said, you got to start painting bigger. That was years ago. And I thought, man, I make my own stretchers, and I thought, man, this is going to be a pain in the neck painting this big. And I paint in an old greenhouse, and an old garage, and I was going, where am I going to put this stuff? And then I figured out a way to move stuff into the basement, but I found painting big really fun, and it becomes a long-term problem. You're putting on color, and you're just working it, and like I said, when I have a big painting going, that might take over a year. I'm just really playing with it, moving it, and then I let it sit for a month, and I look at it again with fresh eyes, and I keep going, and then finally I get it to a lot of the decision making. I really like Mark Rothko paintings, and at the East Wing of the National Gallery of Art, they have a bunch of his paintings, and it's in bright light. At the Phillips Gallery, they have a bunch of his paintings, and it's in very dim light. And when I do a painting, I'm in a greenhouse or a garage, and my light is changing, and I start saying, okay, I want this to be like a Rothko painting, but I want it to be able to be enjoyed throughout the movement of light. And so that's what I try to do. It's in there, I bring it in the house, and if I don't like the way the painting's looking in the house, adjusting to different light settings, I go back out and I do it and I work on it again. So that becomes an interesting challenge, is how do you make something, because Mark Rothko's paintings, they work well in anything, and they're really wonderful. So that's the challenge.
Great. I think we're going to want to leave some time for questions, and I think, Carol, we're supposed to do it up on the screen. Is Carol still here? Oh, I can't see out there. Should they go? Yeah. So, it lit up. Okay. So, yeah, because this is being recorded, if you have a question for Steve, if you could just walk up there and be in the spotlight and at the microphone and ask a question. Then the people at home who watch the video later can hear you. Or if you don't want to do that and you yell it, I will repeat the question, but we'd much rather you be up there. Any questions for Steve? Yes?
I'm just curious, the ones that you do end up making on your iPad or your phone,
No, they're in a rotation, but the question was, if I remember it, when you do the ones you do on your iPhone, what was the question?
So the one you do on your iPhone, how do you reproduce that? Actually, do you do like
Oh,
a display or print?
Okay, I just printed on my Epson printer, but to reproduce it, on your phone, you click, I have an iPhone, so you click the two outer buttons and it does a screenshot. Then I send it to my computer and I move it into my photos and then I pull it up and then I crop it and then I might even adjust the color settings. I just have the simple settings and then I'll print it out on my Epson and then I'll print it out on, I print it out on paper and then I glue it to a foam board, and extra foam board that I have for matting watercolors or whatever. And then I have a mat cutter and I just cut that. But I only use those for studies for other paintings. But I have them up there to look at. Yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions I can translate poorly? Okay, yes. Yeah, please, that would be nice. Okay, thank you.
All right. Hey, Dad. So you talked about wanting to have a show here for a while,
Yep.
since what, like 2 years ago? More?
Yep.
What are you going to do next?
Oh, boy. That's a good question. You know, you always have to, you know, you come off of a show and then it's really exciting. And you start thinking, what do you do next, you know? And that's, I think that's going to be part of my journey from here, you know? Through the last few years, I've uncovered more tools to explore things. But you know, that's a good question, but I'm really excited to find out what the answer is as I move along with this.
We'll be here when you do. Right. Anything else? Anybody? Well, thank you, Steve. That was excellent and enlightening, and you did come full circle, ending up here. So
Definitely, this was really exciting, and I really appreciate, you know, everything the Westport Library has done for me. You know, it's really fun.